welcome back to the Liberal Democrat Hustings for the leadership debate. We're joined by Norman Lamb.
Hello, good to see you both.
Hello, nice to meet
How
you.
are you this evening?
I'm fine.
You've had quite a long day, we've heard
Had
earlier.
a long day. Every day is a long day.
Every day. How do you think your campaign's gone so far? Do you
It's
reckon?
good, I'm enjoying it, and I think we're making real progress. I'm trying to stake out quite a clear, radical, liberal position. I am fundamentally a liberal, and I'm wanting to make the case for our party to re-establish those values. I suspect it's the case that many people out there, if you ask them what do the Lib Dems stand for, they probably would struggle to define it, and I think we need to be much clearer about what we're about.
That was one of the failures of the general election
Yeah.
campaign, you could argue.
I think so. I think a combination of two particular things. First of all, this was a fear election. Middle England, I think, got freaked out by the idea of Ed Miliband and the idea that he was going to be bullied around by Nicola Sturgeon. They didn't find that an attractive proposition. So I think in quite significant numbers and quite late on in the process, they chose to vote Conservative because they were very fearful of that. But the other factor, is that I don't think we were nearly clear enough about what we stood for. So my heart rather sank when we were all told that we must keep repeating the mantra that we'll cut less than the Conservatives and borrow less than Labour, because that defines us in relation to others, doesn't say anything about what we're about, what our values are, and I think that was really important.
So,
And what are you about, and why does that matter to people like me and Leah?
So at the heart of what I'm about is about giving power to people to live your life as you want to live it. Go right back to John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill said that individuals should be able to lead their life, to do whatever they want to do, as long as it doesn't have a negative impact on other people, at which point the state can intervene. And I think that is quite an important guiding principle for a liberal. And I think ultimately, should it be me that decides on my life and what I do, or should it be the state telling me what to do, telling me what I can't do? And as long as it's not affecting other people, it should be me that decides.
But how do you define a negative effect on somebody else? Which perspective do you take? Which person has the right to say, this constitutes a negative effect on me?
Well, of course, there are going to be grey areas. I absolutely recognise that. It's not an absolute clear principle, but it's a very strong principle. So, at its starkest, if I thump you, I'm having a negative impact on you. So the state can intervene and I would be committing a criminal offence. And there are all sorts of other ways in which we can define where I do something which directly impacts on you, but I stop short, of course, of me saying something that might offend you, because that's, that the right of free speech is a very precious right, and it might hurt your feelings, but it's not having any direct impact on you.
Surely hurting my feelings is having a direct impact on me.
Well, yeah, but you can put up with it.
I guess the difficulty is knowing what level of things to put up with, I would have thought.
Of course, I mean, so that's the grey area, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be very clear about what we do define as being out of bounds of individual activity, but also the things where the individual should have a right. So let's take drug offences. At the moment, as a country and as the Western world, we criminalise a lot of people for drug use. And once you have a criminal record, it potentially blights your whole career. And yet the ridiculous aspect of this is that if you smoke a joint, you commit a criminal offence. If you smoke a cigarette, which is actually much more dangerous, you do nothing wrong in the eyes of the state. It kills 100,000 people a year, smoking tobacco. Alcohol does untold damage. So why on earth do we criminalise people for other drug offences? Why do we put money, billions of pounds globally, into the hands of criminal networks? This doesn't actually make sense. Tens of thousands of people lose their lives in Mexico through gang warfare based on drugs. So let's start to rethink our attitudes, and the starting point, in my view, should be to legalise cannabis. They've done it in Colorado, a state actually won by the Republicans, but they've done it and they regulate it and it becomes safer, and they can spend the tax money on educating people about drugs. That for me is the liberal thing to do.
And also your former kind of experience as a minister in Parliament. So if you were to be in that same position again, how would you implement that and persuade other people within Parliament to vote for your...
Well, you go out and make the case for it, and I think actually this is an area...
support that?
Well, I think this is an area where the public are ahead of the politicians. Of course, there's still anxiety and resistance, a bit of fear, but the polling shows a significant percentage of people who now support the case for reform. But I'll give you another example. As a minister, I fought for equality for people who suffer from mental ill health. And it's an extraordinary system we have where if you suffer from mental ill health, you don't get the same right of access to treatment as someone who has a physical health problem. And for me, this is about every individual being treated in the same way, not being discriminated against. And that's again at the heart of my liberalism, the same access to treatment and support when you need it. And I think if we talk about these really big issues which have a massive impact on people's lives, then I think you start to connect with people again, particularly young people who actually in many cases have completely lost faith in politics because the traditional politics just doesn't talk to the issues that concern many of them.
Well, they've lost faith in the Liberal Democrats in
yes,
particular.
Absolutely. And I recognise that, and that's why it's so important for us to rebuild that trust.
Do you think in terms of, because the main sticking point was the tuition fees, do you think you could still say that you are able to implement scrap tuition fees and still put that in your manifesto with people trusting you that you would be able to do that?
I think everything that our party puts forward and argues for, we've got to be able to implement in government. And I think the problem with that policy was, at a time of enormous economic constraint, was that we weren't actually able to do it. And we ought to have known that as we put forward the manifesto. And so the consequence of going for free tuition would have been a cut to university funding, which would have meant fewer students being able to go to university. That would have had a particular impact on students from poorer backgrounds. And instead, what we've done, I mean, we got the politics hopelessly wrong and we broke trust. What actually we've done with the policy that we've implemented is that now more students, about 9% more students from poorer backgrounds are getting to university. Your repayments are totally based on your ability to pay, so it's progressive. Universities have maintained their funding, which is critically important if we're to compete on the global stage. So the policy ultimately has delivered positive results. Incidentally, the Tories now proposing a cut in maintenance grants, which they couldn't do when the Lib Dems were in government because we stopped them. That could have a massive negative impact on students from poorer backgrounds.
And would you actually find that quite frustrating that people are only now starting to realise how much of an effect the Lib Dems had on the coalition in terms of preventing Tory policies to get through?
It is frustrating.
In terms of knowing beforehand and not having that horrible elections night.
Absolutely, and I think people will see now what a constraining influence we were. Not just a constraining influence, because I think we did good liberal things as well. And the thing, I suppose, beyond my own work in mental health, the thing I'm proudest of is the Pupil Premium. Now, this is £2.5 billion this year, targeted at children from the poorest backgrounds, with the specific intent on enabling them to achieve just as much as everyone else, closing the attainment gap. Now, that policy has a direct impact on children's lives. It changes lives. It gives them a chance of achieving the very best with their talent. I think that's really inspiring, and I'm really proud of the fact we did it. No one noticed we did it, and we were hopeless at conveying that to the public, but it's going to change children's lives, and it's something that is again at the heart of what I'm about as a liberal.
So if you win this leadership election, that's what you're going to be pushing forward.
Oh, totally. And early years, incidentally, the biggest impact you can have on a child's life, particularly those from the poorest backgrounds, is in early years. Universal nursery education is something I sort of very strongly believe in, so that because we know that by the age of 5, if you're from a disadvantaged background, you've already fallen well behind, and we've got to try and address that.
And so why are children and education more important than, say, health or policing?
Look, I'm not saying it's something I'm particularly proud of, but I was a health minister, and I I'm a very, very strong supporter of the NHS and of equality for mental health within the NHS. And incidentally, there is a massive financial pressure on the NHS now, which we have to fight to defend. We have to make sure that people, whoever they are, regardless of their ability to pay, get access to the best healthcare when they need it.
And given that, and given the limited resources which this country has, how would you, if you are able to be in a position of power, how would you go around allocating the limited resources we have to the great number of services which are available?
Well, there are always difficult choices to make, and we've been in government for 5 years, and we were absolutely confronted by that reality. And I think, incidentally, despite the massive damage it's done us as a party, we have learned about the disciplines of government, and we must be able to demonstrate to the public, as I think we did, that we will be disciplined and we will ensure that we have proper control over public finances. But I wouldn't, as the Conservatives do, seek to clear the deficit only by cutting services, cutting funding for services, cutting welfare. £12 billion of welfare cuts will increase the divide between rich and poor and will damage many very vulnerable people on disability and with mental health problems. I find that hard to tolerate, and so I would be prepared, and we argued for increases in tax for particularly those at the top of the income scale. There is immense wealth in our country. There are people who have sort of super wealth, and yet the Tories won't contemplate a single extra penny of tax on those people, and I don't agree with that.
Even though economic theory does suggest that the taxes on high-end earners tend to be the least effective at raising income.
That you're talking about tax on income, on earnings, on work. Now, as a principle, I would prefer to shift the burden of taxation away from work and onto unearned wealth. And there's plenty of evidence that
When is wealth ever unearned?
Sorry?
When is wealth unearned?
Well, I mean, it can be unearned when it's just inherited, for example, or when your house that you own, if you own a mansion, I'm not sure whether you do.
I wish.
But if your house happens to go up by £500,000 in value due to nothing that we've done, but it's just gone up because of the market, that increases the gap between rich and poor, and it entrenches wealth. Now, if we just are saying, well, we should do nothing about that, I don't agree with that. I think that we need to make sure that the contribution to society is proportionate to people's ability to bear that burden.
And why do we need to do that? Why is that important?
Because we've got to make sure that we fund good service, good quality public services, and critically give opportunity to every child to make the very most of their talents. And what I argue for in education, it's not only right and a good liberal principle, it's also economically right. We massively under-exploit, in the best possible sense of the word, our human talent, our human resources in this country, because so many people don't get the education or the training that they need to make the most of their talents.
Mr. Lamb, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.